Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is John Cotton, Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy retired. He's the Executive MBA Adjunct Faculty at the School of Business for George Mason University. Admiral, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the invitation. Really enjoy being here.
Great. Well, I just wanted to start it off and see if you could tell us a little bit about your past and what makes you such a great teacher over at GMU.
Well, first of all, I enjoy teaching a lot. It's part of being a little bit older and giving back. And I went to the United States Naval Academy, graduated in 1973, served in the Navy, transitioned, became a reservist, and had a pretty successful reserve career that culminated as Chief of Navy Reserve. So I worked in the Pentagon from 2000 to 2008 during our operations, and a lot of excitement that went on. I was also an airline pilot. I worked for Eastern Airlines and American Airlines. I was a captain with American, so I took leaves of absence to go work on active duty for many years. Then I transitioned to the civilian sector, worked as a defense contractor with DRS Technologies, which is now Leonardo DRS. And then I used my wonderful 9/11 GI Bill benefits to get an executive MBA at GMU. Going through the program, I went to the dean and said, why do we do it this way? Why don't we do this? And at the end, he said, why don't you join our faculty and help us? So we transitioned the National Defense Program to the National Security Program. And that's where we are today, talking about national security.
Speaking of national security, there's a lot that's going on in the threat landscape. We have Russia, China, North Korea. Iran is the newest thing resurfacing again. So do you mind just sort of laying out that landscape that your students are going to be dealing with in the next 20 years or so?
Sure. I put the students through an intense one-week residency program, and we do lectures in the morning with subject matter experts, and then in the afternoon we do field trips. And we try to look at the government side, the civilian side, and then the students who have that similar background, we discuss the issues, talking about the external threats, the internal issues that we have. And it's interesting, on the very first day, I asked the students on a blank sheet of paper, list the 3 biggest threats to our country. And then on Friday, I hand the piece of paper out with their names on it, and they all changed their answers after talking to people who are in the arena inside the Beltway. Right. So that's kind of what we do.
So what ends up on that piece of paper?
Well, it's interesting because when they come in, they usually parrot whatever they've read on their flavor of media or news. Sure. Or perhaps what they just listened to on WTOP when they were driving in, who knows. But it starts with Russia or China or perhaps Iran or perhaps trade or something else. And then we talk all week long and we figure out that it might be Congress, the intransience, the impasse that's going on right now. It might be our federal debt, could be our educational system and how many students are getting lost. And particularly for military folks and government people, it's the increasing competition for talent. It's finding the people that'll come work here in Washington, D.C., work in these important jobs. That could be one of the biggest issues we face.
And you know, I wanted to go off of that a little bit because the National Defense Authorization Act for 2020 is coming up. It's already being worked on by the Senate and the House. And in the past, they have given some new sort of authorities to Congress and excuse me, to the Defense Department in order to help them hire talent. They have direct commissioning authorities. They have areas where they can give pilots more money and bonuses. So how is that working out for them, and what more do they need to do to get out of that 20th century sort of complex?
Well, I'm glad you brought up 20th century because that's when I was serving. Sure. And we assumed at that time that there was a never-ending supply of high school graduates that would come and serve. First we had the draft, then we had the volunteer service, which we have now, which has increasingly got more expensive. So there's a cost with human capital. And also we want to be able to retain people. But with civilians hiring, and the arduous impact of military careers, moving all the time, deploying all the time. Some people want to leave and homestead, put their families one place. Increasingly, a lot of spouses work, children don't want to work. So we have all these things working against each other. Yes, we have new authorities, but it costs more money. And we're getting to the point now with our discretionary spending being somewhat capped, that the Defense Department doesn't have much more. We've got to figure out how to do business better, how to acquire things better, how to do smarter things, change the way we work. So you have all those issues going on too. And these are issues in the NDAA. And of course we have overseas operations, the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund. Some people want to increase that. And then also politicians want to have an offset to make sure we have domestic spending too. So all those things go into the Authorization Act, and then they of course hand it over to the appropriators.
So you've talked about things getting more expensive, and Congress obviously is the one that's in charge of appropriating these things. So 2020, there seems to be a debate, 733 billion, 750 billion, and then there's some people who are saying 700 billion. That one's a little more on the dark horse candidate side. What are you forecasting? What do you see for contractors in the acquisition stage and just the budget at large?
Well, the students, we kind of back up a little bit and we talk about our national security strategy, our national defense strategy, our national military strategy, and then who are the threats? What do we really have to budget against? And I'll say this, sometimes we prefer doing yesterday than what we do or face tomorrow. Secretary Gates, when he was SecDef, said we have a 100% record being correct about not predicting the future. We tend to do the best last. And then remember Admiral Mullen said when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, perhaps the biggest threat we face is our budget deficit because we have interest on the debt. If you look at the charts right now from CBO, we've got interest payments that will exceed the defense budget in about 2023. So I believe there's going to be some belt tightening. We got to do business better. I think the services need to be able to close down some facilities, which brings up that ugly word no one wants to talk about, BRAC, base realignment and closure. That usually happens in a president's second term. Maybe we'll face something like that. We'll see. No community wants that. And certainly no congressman. They always say NIMBY. You heard that word before?
In my backyard.
Not in my backyard. It's in your backyard, it's okay. So all those dynamics are going on, plus the biggest thing in town. I have one slide where a big box in the middle, it says election 2020. That's what's going on right now. So will we have a continuing resolution in October? I believe so. Could it be a half year or full year? Probably so.
Really? So you're thinking half year to full year?
I do.
And what about that? Just the partisan divide? Things can't kind of get going at this point?
It's why make a decision now when things might change in a year.
Yeah.
So just put things off. The easiest thing to do is stall, and we've certainly seen Congress do that, choose to make a decision later.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when
Sure.
we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about politics. We're going to talk some more about national security and get more of your opinions. My guest today is retired Vice Admiral John Cotton of the U.S. Navy. He's the executive MBA adjunct faculty for the School of Business at George Mason University. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione, on the discussion National Security, Defense, and Educating Our Future Industry Leaders, sponsored by George Mason University on Federal News Radio, part of Federal News Network.